regarding the fall of the Jiva. It's so simple, but okay, I'll give you the short version. Krishna, in the Bhagavad, in all of our literature, Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, Chaitanya Charitamrita, there's only one place where Krishna directly talks about how the Jiva came to this world. And that is in the Bhagavatam, 4th canto, chapter 28, I think verses 53 and 55, or right around there, where Krishna says twice, you rejected me, you left me. He says it twice. Hitva mam, rejecting me, you came to this world. Mam vihaya, leaving me, you came to this world. Now, so the arguments given against this are not serious. I'll explain it very briefly. Prabhupada says in a purport regarding Jai and Vijay, where Prabhupada said the conclusion is no one falls from Vaikuntha. So the people that quote that always forget to do one thing, and that is they forget to see what that story is about. So what is that story about? First of all, who's speaking there? It's Yudhisthira and Narada Muni, I think. Narada Muni speaking to Yudhisthira. And he begins speaking because Yudhisthira says, there's something you said which I find ashraddheya, which literally means unbelievable. Unbelievable, ashraddheya. And the unbelievable thing is that someone who does not want to enjoy without Krishna, someone who wants to serve Krishna, who loves Krishna, can be driven out of the spiritual world by someone else. And that's what Yudhisthira says I find unbelievable, and that's what the whole story is about. So it's in that context that Prabhupada says no one can be, fall by Vaikuntha, in the sense that no one can be driven out, someone who wants to serve Krishna. That's what the story is about. Another, I have to say, bad argument, no offense intended to anyone, is that how could we ever leave Krishna? I'll tell you why that's a false argument. Like the spiritual world is so groovy that who would ever leave it? There's a few things wrong with that argument. Number one, the spiritual world doesn't operate on the principle of hedonism. It's not like it's so ecstatic, there's so much raw pleasure that no one would ever give it up. It's about love. But the real point is, you cannot be held responsible for your decisions if you did not clearly understand what your choices were and what the consequences were. In order for you to be responsible in general for anything you have to do it consciously, and you have to know what else you might have done. So let's say, like this really silly thing, we come from the Tatastha Shakti. Okay, information alert, there is no such thing as a Tatastha Shakti. There's no place. Tatastha Shakti is an ontological category. It's a category, it's a type of living being. We are Tatastha Shakti. There is no place that is Tatastha Shakti. It's not a place. It's a kind of living being. So to say we come from Tatastha Shakti means we come from our ontological category, which is just complete nonsense. If you say we come from Mahavishnu, we do, in between creation cycles. But that's not the original explanation. Now, here's why people say, well, no one could ever choose to leave Krishna. But that's nonsense for the following reason. Because even if you were coming from the marginal potency, which is not a place, but let's say even if you were coming from that, you could not be held responsible for your decision to come to the material world unless you knew there were other items on the menu. There were other places you could go. If you didn't know there was somewhere else, how could you be held responsible and punished for choosing the material world? And if you knew that there were other options like Krishna Loka or Vishnu Loka, that would not be a real option unless you actually know what that means. It's like you go to a Japanese restaurant and it's the whole menu's in Japanese, and someone says, well, why didn't you choose this? Well, because I don't read Japanese. I don't read Japanese. How can you be held responsible for choosing to come to this world if you had no idea what else you could choose? And if you did know what else you could choose, then you consciously left Krishna. You know, the whole motto of Prabhupada's movement is back to home. I mean, that's not hard English, is it? I mean, is anyone here really that linguistically challenged that you can't understand the words back to home? So Prabhupada said, you know, in the first record he made, we are all originally Krishna conscious entities. Like maybe someone needs, I don't know, English as a second language training. Originally, we are all originally Krishna conscious entities. So some people, I think, are just determined to get it wrong. And they you know, they dedicate their lives to keeping down women. They dedicate their lives to contradicting Prabhupada. Strange desires, you know, some strange living entities show up. Chanting Hare Krishna, but, you know, dedicating your life to proving that Prabhupada's wrong. Or now there's a group of people that want to show that, you know, we don't have Krishna, love for Krishna inside of us, even though, you know, the Chaitanya Charitamrita says that we do. Even though the analogy Krishna uses for illusion, the image Krishna uses throughout the Gita is covering. Abritam jnana, consciousness is covered. You have to uncover consciousness. And when you uncover consciousness, you're conscious of what really exists, namely Krishna and your relationship with Krishna. Anyway, I won't go on, but it's funny because there's some people that think that if you just blatantly contradict Prabhupada's teachings, you're still a loyal follower. But if you just, you know, don't wear a dhoti, then, you know, you're not really following Prabhupada. We have a lot of, you know, very deep thinkers. So, any other point?
All right, could I ask one more thing on that?
Sure, Bhattahari Ji.
Thank you so much. I've been plagued by this thing and I really appreciate your answers. It seems like Prabhupada's very clear and yeah, I love your answers. It seems like mainly they're quoting Jiva Goswami. And the last
misquoting.
So I haven't studied Jiva Goswami's statements on that, but do you know what those arguments are?
They misquote. Jiva Goswami doesn't say we were never with Krishna. One thing is, and we explain, you know, we wrote that book called OOP, which is our original position. Yeah. Great acronym, isn't it? OOP. But anyway, so I wrote about half that book. And what I showed is that in all Vedic literature, whether it's Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, the Upanishads, you name it, in every Vedic literature, whenever words are used that denote unlimited time spans, and whenever those words are used about something in the material world, the words are not being used literally. So when it said anadi karma, or beginningless karma, it's not literal because you never find in the Vedic literature any word denoting an endless time span, which is being used literally. I'll give you an example. In the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, Krishna describes the soul as Shashvato, Shashvato yang Purana, everlasting. Shashvata means everlasting. Now, Krishna uses the same word, the exact same word, just in the feminine, Shashvati, because he's talking about sama, years, everlasting years, endless, eternal years, to talk about something which Krishna directly says is not eternal. So, and he's talking in chapter 6 of the Bhagavad Gita about when Arjuna asks, Ayati Sadayopeta, what happens to the faithful person that falls down from his practice, the fallen yogi? And then Krishna says, that person goes up to these pious planets, all kind, every day is a festival up in the higher planets. And then Krishna says, Ushitwa. Ushitwa is just actually from the word vasa, like dwelling. Anyway, it's just the imperative. So Ushitwa, having dwelled for eternal time, endless time in those higher planets, he comes back. In other words, it's obviously not eternal because he wasn't there before, this fallen yogi. He was in this world, he went up there and he comes back to this world. So in every possible sense, it's not eternal. And yet Krishna uses the word Shashvata. And that's because it's referring to something in the material world, and therefore it's figurative, not literal. But when that word is used about the soul, it means literally eternal. And you find that's exactly the same for words like nitya, which can be always or eternal, anadi, or sanatana. Every Sanskrit word that denotes an unlimited time span, when applied to something in this world, is used non-literally and figuratively to describe just a very long time, but not literally eternal. And also, and the same words used about actual spirit, eternal things, the word is used literally. So therefore, here's another point from the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna says in chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita, Na sato vidyate bhavo, na bhavo vidyate sataha. Of the asat, temporary things, there is no permanent existence. And of things that have, are sat, there's no non-existence. So if there was such a thing as a spiritual body, which didn't exist before, right? Because you never had one. And now it exists because you just got liberated because you subscribed to my ministry. So if that was the case, then it would directly contradict the most basic teaching of the Bhagavad Gita. The most basic teaching of the Bhagavad Gita is that there are only two kinds of things: eternal things and temporary things. Temporary things never are eternal, and eternal things never begin and never end. So if your spiritual body begins at a certain point, it is a third category of thing which Krishna says doesn't exist. So, and if you say, if you see our conditioned life was literally beginningless, then how did it start? What that would mean is that Krishna, for endless, infinite time, made us defective. And since then our conditioned life, our defectiveness, would have no beginning, it would have no beginning, how could we be the cause of it? How could we have chosen something which was never chosen? Because it always existed. And so these people, they're not like born philosophers, because they quote the word anadi, but they also quote the word tatastha shakti. So if we come from the tatastha shakti, we're not anadi baddha. How could we be conditioned since beginningless time when we came from somewhere else? Even though that somewhere else is not actually a place. There is no place called tatastha shakti. So there's all kinds of philosophical contradictions. And again, it all comes because some people somehow or other have come to the conclusion that they know much better than Prabhupada. For example, I started Krishna West. I should have like a little button I can push that makes like this cheering sound. Anyway, so I started Krishna West, and I wrote papers giving massive evidence that Prabhupada approves of this. Not only approves, Prabhupada is urging us to do this. Urging us to do this. Prabhupada personally said to me in Honolulu, he said, I never said you have to wear Indian clothes. So, I decided to run with that bull. So I feel because I'm in Prabhupada's movement and I'm Prabhupada's disciple, whatever I do, even though it may seem a little, unusual to some people, I feel a personal responsibility to justify what I'm doing within Prabhupada's instructions or his personal example. So how can you come from the Tatastha Shakti and yet be Anadi Baddha? And again, the only time Krishna, as in God, the only time Krishna ever talks about this in any of our literature, he says twice, you rejected me and came to this world. And that's why you're suffering, which is perfectly logical. Because how could you be suffering for something? How could you suffer for something you never chose? What kind of monster would God be if he makes you suffer for something you never chose? And if you did choose it, how is it a fair choice if you didn't know what the other options were? So I rest my case.
I'm satisfied, but I wonder, I think there's other arguments they have that I don't know. I guess I would like to ask about.
Does anyone know of any other serious arguments?
One thing I heard is Lord Chaitanya plants the seed of devotional service in our heart. So if he plants the seed, is bhakti dormant in our heart, or does it have to be placed by devotees in Krishna?
Ah, that's clever. Yes, Lord Chaitanya plants the seed in the sense that Guru Krishna Prasade Pai Bhakti Lata Bij, in the sense that we begin our spiritual life. I mean, you're born in the Krishna conscious movement. At a certain point, you decide to stick with it, or you decide. I mean, all of us, whether you're born in the movement or not born in the movement, at a certain point, everyone has to decide that I want to do this. And so the same thing, Rupa Goswami says, Ado Shraddha, in the beginning, there's little faith in the beginning. So in terms of talking about what actually happens in this world, we can talk about, like, I joined the movement on this day, or I began chanting Hare Krishna on that day. But Lord Chaitanya, that famous verse, that, what's that verse? Sadhya Kabunai, Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema.
Prem, Sadhya Kabunai.
Yeah. So Nitya Siddha means eternally a fact. It doesn't begin. Love of Krishna didn't begin at a certain time. It's Nitya Siddha, established, perfected. But Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema is Sadhya, and it is not Sadhya. Now, the word Sadhya is obviously another form of the word sadhana. And so this directly refutes that idea, because, as we know, we begin on the platform of sadhana bhakti. But sadhya means something to be achieved by sadhana. Something to be achieved by sadhana. That's what the word sadhya means. And so therefore, sadhya, it is never sadhya. Devotional service is never something that you can just build, because it's always there. So to say it's never sadhya is in direct contrast to saying it's nitya siddha. Nitya siddha and na sadhya are diametric opposites. Something which always existed can't be brought about. It can be awakened. And that's exactly by the way, the image. You got to put all these things together, not just use the gardening image. For example, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Jiva Jago, wake up. When you wake up, you don't create a life you didn't have before. What in the world does Bhaktivinoda Thakur mean when he says wake up? And so Jiva Jago exactly corresponds. So these two opposites, something is Nitya Siddha cannot be Sadhya. Something that is Sadhya cannot be Nitya Siddha. They're exact opposites. So Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema Sadhya Kabunai Shavanadi Shuddha Chite Kari Udai. The word Udai, by the way, means that it awakens. Like, for example, Udila Aruna. It's just another form of the word. The sun rises. So Udaya is another form of the word Udila. It means arising. Ud actually means up, and Aya means going in Sanskrit. So Udaya Shavana Shuddha Chite. So when you say that this love manifests, it arises when your mind is purified. This is so simple. This is so simple. What is the image of purification? When you purify water, the pure water was already there. To purify something doesn't mean you inject it. To purify something means it's already there. You just remove everything that is impure, extraneous, not the real thing itself. When you purify water, you simply remove everything that is not water. And what's left is pure water. So how could you use the image of Jago, Jiva Jago, waking up? How could you use the image of Shuddha Chite? The mind has to be purified. When you purify something, you don't add anything to it. You remove things. Purification means removing, not adding. So the image of Jiva Jago, the image of Shuddha Chite, of Nitya Siddha, it's all over the place. And like I said, if your spiritual body didn't exist before, it would be in a third ontological category that, according to the Bhagavad Gita, doesn't exist. Nasato vidyate bhavo na bhavo vidyate sataha. 2. Ubayor, of the two. Ubayor means of the two. And then Krishna says, Ubayor api, even of these two, drishto antas. Anta means end. It's the same word as in English. Anta, in this case, the end means the conclusion, the final conclusion. Ubayor api drishto antas tuanayo tattva-darshivi. Okay, it's, oh my God, this is like the super smoking gun. 1 second. Gonna close my window because it's get a little cool here. I mean, if you were, I know you probably opened all your windows in Pennsylvania to beat the heat today, so you may want to close your window. So Krishna says, God, when you get to a certain age and you get up after you've been sitting, you can walk like some old guy. Anyway, so Ubayor Dristo Antas to Anayos Tattva-darshivi. Krishna says that this conclusion, this final conclusion of the two, of the only two kinds of things there are, this final conclusion is seen by those who are tattva-darshi. The exact same word Krishna uses in the Bhagavad Gita, that tadvidhi pranipatena pariprasnena sevaya upadekshanti te jnanam jnanam tattva-darshina. So tattva-darshina, we just, and they're using different parts of speech, same word. Tattva means, tattva is a fundamental category of existence, a fundamental real thing. I've explained this so much. Okay, it's very quickly. Tat in Sanskrit means that. You just add an H and it's English. Tat means that. That is a demonstrative pronoun, as you all know. So a demonstrative pronoun is just what it says it is. It demonstrates that. So when you say that, you're pointing out something. So therefore, in super condensed Sanskrit philosophical jargon, tat just means a real thing, because you can't point out something that's not a real thing. So tat means that, as in Om Tat Sat. So therefore, twa in Sanskrit just means it's something like the English suffix ness, thatness. In other words, being, having the state of being that. So therefore, the word tattva means a fundamental real thing, or a fundamental category of real things, often translated as truth, like those who have seen the truth, tattvadarshi, but it really means, literally, more technically, those who have seen the fundamental categories of real things. And that's why the word is used tattva as, for example, in Vishnu tattva. So to say Vishnu tattva means that there is a fundamental category of real thing, which is Vishnu, or Jiva tattva. Anyway, so Krishna, when Krishna says, approach those who've seen the truth, he says literally those who have seen tattva. So a bona fide guru is not simply one who has seen the truth, but specifically, according to the Bhagavad Gita, one who has seen the truth categorically. One who has seen the truth categorically. And in this verse, in sort of this Sanskritic Bengali, that Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema Sadhya Kabunai Shavanadi Shuddha Chite Kariye Udai. So, I'm sorry, I was in the Gita verse. So, Nasato Vidyate Bhavo, Nava Vidyate Sata, Ubayora Pi Drishto Antas. So Krishna says those who are Tattvadarshi, Tuaniyos, those who have seen all of the fundamental categories of reality, they say there are these two things. These are the Tattvadarshis. These are the people who, according to Bhagavad Gita 434, will enlighten you. And therefore, to say there is a third thing, which is not mentioned in the Gita, which is not mentioned in the Bhagavatam, a thing which began but doesn't end, completely contradicts the most fundamental level of our philosophy.